Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Horror Detour. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about short horror, in particular short horror fiction. And the reason I want to talk about it is that it's kind of my wheelhouse. It's where I operate the most as a writer. It's also as a fan and enthusiast of horror. It's the stuff that I read the most. I I do read horror novels, and there are amazing horror novels out there. But I find myself diving more often than not into short story collections or one-off short stories. Now, I partly do that because a lot of the time that's the stuff that I'm kind of researching for to understand the horror genre better, but also for videos and narrations and things like that for the channel. But I've just always gravitated towards that, and I used to think that it was like an attention thing. I'd have a bad habit of like reading half a novel and then putting it down, and then if I don't go back to it within a week, it's gone cold for me. But I don't think that's the issue because there are plenty of novels that I finish. I think that it's not to do with my attention problems. I think it's more to do with the fact that horror as a genre works better within a short form more often than not. And the reason for that, well, I think there are several reasons. I think one reason is that horror stories tend to revolve often around one driving mechanic. There's one driving force in the story. It could be a cursed videotape. It could be a haunted house with a ghost with some sort of backstory to it. It could be a brush with the strange as someone walks past a graveyard and sees something that they're not quite sure exactly what they were looking at. It can be anything. More often than not, these ideas, when they're drawn out and expanded upon, actually become diluted. And part of the reason for that is that fear, the fear response, it isn't it isn't often one that is drawn out. It comes in short, sharp bursts. Unless you're unlucky enough to be in some sort of war scenario or a scenario where there's something of impending doom hanging over you at every moment, which does unfortunately happen in life. But I think often the fears, especially the irrational fears that we have, are ones that kind of come in moments and come in waves. And I should stipulate that I'm not talking about anxiety. As an anxiety sufferer, I'm not definitely not talking about proper phobias and anxiety disorders. I'm talking about, suppose what I would say are healthy fears, fears don't that don't affect your well-being, they don't affect your mental health, but they are fears that come, you know. They are fears that affect you sometimes at night. You'll hear something. You find yourself, or at least I find myself, getting out of bed and checking the rooms in the house because what was that? What was that noise? There was one night where I heard a crash, a really loud bang of something crashing, and it was definitely in the house. My wife heard it too, and I jumped out of bed and I was like, "There's someone in the house!" And I ran down the stairs, going, "Ah!" trying to appear bigger and more frightening than I actually am, and never found what it was that caused that sound. And there's actually something called, I think it's crashing syndrome or something like that, where people hear noises, like hear like a crash in their head. But this wasn't it because my wife heard it as well. Anyway, that's a legitimate fear, you know, someone breaking into your house, especially when you've got family, but even just for yourself. So those sorts of fears, they come in like short bursts, and I think that horror fiction works within a shorter form a lot of the time because it works alongside that kind of brevity that you have with fear in general. And I'm not talking about things that linger. Obviously, there are fears and tensions and anxieties which linger. But a lot of the time, these things, you get startled, you get shocked. These sorts of things come in short, sharp bursts, which is maybe partly why there's so many jump out scares in modern horror, which most of the time I'm not really up for, but when you get them done properly, it can be really effective. So I think that there's that aspect of it, but I also think that I've always said that horror is, especially the ghost story, is probably one of the very first types of stories that people ever told. 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, however old humanity is, those were probably amongst the first stories ever told. Stories about what happens to you when you die. Stories about there being some sort of karmic just desserts for people who do bad in this life. Things might happen to them from beyond the grave in response to that. And also just the unknown of the world, not knowing how the world works, not knowing what sort of entities might inhabit the world. So I think these stories were probably right at the start of humanity, and they were told around campfires, and they were told to thrill and help people deal with fear, help people try on apprehension and dread without being in any real danger. And they would be told in short form, because you're not going to sit around a campfire and listen to something for 5 hours. You're going to sit around a campfire and maybe listen to someone tell a ghost story that lasts 10 minutes. And then someone else might tell a story. Or suddenly the baked potato and the fire's ready. I don't know. So you move on to something else. But it's a short form. It doesn't last all that long. Maybe it's also partly because in our modern life, unfortunately, we have become affected in terms of our attention spans. I certainly have. And a short story, being able to read something in one sitting, fits in with our kind of hectic lives. And it also fits in with that reduced attention span. So there could be that as well. But I do think that horror just sits perfectly within that short story format. And you have great horror novels. There's no doubt about that. Some of my favourite books of all time are horror novels. But I think more often than not, most of the great horror stories are short stories. Most of the great ghost stories are short stories. And I was just wondering, what do you think about that? Do you find that? Do you find that in listening to short horror stories online or in podcasts, do you find that to be something that resonates with you more, that affects you more? Or do you prefer to delve into something that stays with you for days and days and days, or however long it takes you to read a novel? I'm just interested to see what people think about that. Because I have thought before about doing, serializing a novel, for example, or doing much longer stories in parts across the channel, whether it be classic tales or my own. And I think I've been a little bit reticent in doing that because I feel like that kind of, if I can really just scare someone or just entertain them for 20 minutes, just 20 minutes to half an hour, to me that's just like a little nugget of gold. That's just perfect, because you're able to wash the dishes and listen to that. You were able to walk to the shops and do that. You were able to do some housework and do that. You were able to listen to falling asleep and do it, to do that. That's the sort of thing that I'm really aiming for right now, is the sort of shorter form of horror. And I think anything from 5-10 minutes up to like half an hour is just the perfect length for me, and that tends to be the length of time it takes to read a normal kind of short story. So anyway, do you agree? Do you think horror sits best within short horror, within that short form? Or do you think that... There's my stomach going again. Sorry, everyone. Or do you think that... I haven't had dinner. Or do you think that horror works better in long form? Because there's definitely something to be said for drawing out dread and suspense and mystery, especially thrillers. Like they work really well in that way. So please do let me know what you think, and I'll be back soon with another video or another vlog or another narration. I don't know what's coming up next because I'm recording all these videos and who knows what order they'll go out on. But I'm sure of one thing: I really appreciate you, and thanks for spending a little bit of time with me. Bye for now.